Today, we're not going to talk about acting and the bright lights or entertainment. We're going to talk about something rather more sombre, because many years ago, Madeleine was the victim of sexual abuse, and she's here to tell us about it and what happened afterwards.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for such a sombre intro. And I know some listeners might think it's odd to have me on a crime podcast, aside from saying that some of my acting roles have probably been a bit criminal. So I've created, with my very good friend Gary Jubelin, who many people would know, a podcast series called Predatory, which is currently airing. The first ep has just gone up, and it was prompted by my own experience in finally seeking justice. And I now, through many, many years of therapy, working closely within the space, feel I have an obligation to utilise my platform to help other victims, or shall we say survivors, to stand up and seek justice for themselves, because we live in a society which consistently looks the other way. When we talk about childhood sexual abuse, it's an uncomfortable topic, because the very idea that an adult would seek to engage sexually with a child is uncomfortable. It's abhorrent, but it's happening. And the statistics hold up the facts that it's happening a lot. Traditional statistics suggest 3 out of 5 women, 3 out of 6, 7 men. Speak to any therapist or specialist in the field and they'll say that's very conservative. Closer to 5 out of 6 women, 4 out of 6 men will have experienced some kind of sexual contact whilst they were children with an adult. And yet we keep looking the other way. You know yourself, Andrew, this is your bread and butter. Australians love true crime. Yeah. We can't get enough of it. And yet we have a crime which has some of the highest statistics in terms of offences, victims, lowest rates of prosecution, and yet we pretend it's not there. And while we continue to do that, these predators are given a green light to access the most vulnerable, precious members of our society, and that's our children.
Do you feel that this is something that's become more obvious and clear to us now, that we're actually opening our eyes in ways that our parents and grandparents did not?
Absolutely. I mean, I guess one of the arguments, aside from the discomfort that this subject matter prompts, is that it's always been a part of society. Yes. It's always been a part of society. There's a very much a, well, if it was good enough for me, it's good enough for you. Just put up with it and move on. But now in an age, and I think that COVID was a fabulous prompt for this, that more people thought about their mental health and seeking a greater sense of well-being within themselves and accessing professional help, we began to unpack why some of our behaviours are what they are, why we are drawn to certain perilous situations, and that has opened up the door to discussing this a bit more openly. But it's still inherently very, very taboo. We don't want to talk about it. But until as a society we're prepared to talk about it a bit more, there's no opportunity to heal.
Now, as an adult actor, you played many roles, but our audience will be very familiar with the fact that you played the true life role, if you like, of fictionalised but a true life character of Danielle Maguire, who was a prominent figure in the gangland wars in Melbourne and consort of many big names, including Tony Mockbell and Toby Mitchell and
Gangitano
and a few others. But that tough, beautiful actor that knew what she was doing and knew the lines. At one point, she was a child in a country town, burdened with what I would call the burden of beauty, which, like wealth, can be more of a burden than anything else, particularly with children, and particularly probably female children, and children and teenagers. It does attract people. And it doesn't always attract people for the right reasons. Is that true?
I think that's true, but I certainly wouldn't narrow it down to questions of beauty. It's about access. That what I've learned is that pedophiles are And through this podcast series, I've discovered from speaking to forensic psychologists like Sarah Yule and Dr. Karen Owens, who was one of the first to begin programs in rehabilitating sex offenders, that it's all about opportunity and access, that they are patient, they will groom not just their victims but everyone around their victims, the entire family, the entire community to get what they want. And most devastatingly, that if caught, the chance of them reoffending is very, very high.
Yep.
And can they be rehabilitated? Most specialists will say no. And by the time they're caught, there's often hundreds of thousands of offences in their past. So if a child is offended against, it's never a one-off. No. It's never an aberration, a slip-up. That won't happen. No. It's probably happened many, many times before.
Indeed. Yeah.
And this is what's so important to point out, that in those formative years, the world should be a place of hope, safety and opportunity. That when you are exposed to sexual abuse as a child, you see the world through trauma lens, through traumatised eyes, and the world is a very dark place. Suddenly it's a place where you believe you have no value, that what your instincts tell you inherently is wrong is actually right and you somehow asked for. Okay. You learn that you are an object for the pleasure of other people first and foremost, and that you are not deserving of safety, security, love, or respect. And you go out into the world with that expectation. You seek relationships, you seek employment, you seek opportunities that validate your own sense of worthlessness. Yeah. Now, the question I would say is, we've swept this under the rug for so long, accepted that it's just part of society. Imagine the society we could build if people were not exposed to this. Yeah. Now I'm talking about criminals. Yeah. We're talking about people who engage in substance abuse, who hurt other people, who hurt society at large.
Without doubt. Yeah.
What is the root cause? Speaking to someone amazing like Russell Manser, 23 years behind bars for being a bank robber. Yeah. He was abused in all of the institutions from a very young age.
Half of them were, at least.
Absolutely.
Half the people in jail.
And that's how it's manifested with him. And that was... You'll hear in his episode, he and I sitting across from each other in tears, because here I am, an actress who's held up in one light. Here he is, a reformed criminal. And we're holding hands going, we both know exactly how we feel.
And they just reacted in different ways and went different ways. But
it leaves a blank hole inside you and you fill it with things.
You know,
whether it's crime, drugs, perfectionism, seeking, constantly seeking. I've spent so much of my life seeking something that was stolen from me.
It is a point very well made by you that, and I've noticed this over decades in what we do, that so many people, particularly violent people, people who are extraordinarily violent, in the case of men, and I think self-harmers with women often.
And that's the whole broad spectrum, self-harm, drug abuse, eating disorders, the lot. Abused
as kids. And if you go through... all sorts of people. Christopher Dale Flannery, the notorious hitman that killed so many people, and so many, the guy that did the family court bombings and shot people, killed a judge and others, terrible murderer. He, when you go back through it, you just notice a tiny little sliver of biography. He was sent to that, it's a Mittagong boys' home. It was a notorious boys' home out of Sydney, south of Sydney. When he was, a little cherubic 11-year-old, he's sent there for some, I think mum died or something.
Yeah.
And
what do you think
afterwards,
happened there?
What do you think happened there?
Yeah, I know.
What do you think happened there? I mean, we know what happened there. Russell Cox, all these big-time crooks who were cold-blooded killers, a lot of them. That's what happened to them.
Because
they were turned into something.
As I said earlier, you are taught to see the world as a place that wants to hurt you.
So you heard it
you
first.
Get in first.
That's what, exactly. So, and I would suggest that, the sex industry is full of damaged girls.
100%, because...
Every second girl has got a
And you said, funnily enough, earlier that, beauty can be a curse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, when you are taught that you are just an object for someone else's pleasure, you objectify yourself.
Bad lesson.
You curate yourself to be I'm just here
Yeah.
for the male gaze, the female gaze, whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
I'm just here for someone else.
Yeah.
My pleasure, my desire, my fulfillment, my dreams, my ambitions are secondary.
Yeah, to that.
And so I will do what I need to do to myself just to get by.
It's a tricky thing because, money gets attached to it in the end.
Yeah,
Then you say, well, this is the way to
absolutely.
make the money, whatever.
And it becomes transactory, as you said.
Transactory, it is.
How else can you see the world in a different light when your first experience of sex, of relationships, of what we would call, inverted commas, love, hurts, is damaging? We're talking about situations where people sometimes need reconstructive surgery because of what happens to their tiny little bodies.
Yeah. It is just truly terrible. But has been with us, but people like you stepping up and speaking out is changing that. It's not that there's more predators now.
It's changing the narrative.
They have different tools to work with.
Different ways to work, much more apparent. And in bygone times, it was the stranger. But now we're aware of familial sexual abuse, online sexual abuse.
Yeah.
The notion of being this rare event is finally being thrown out the window. But I can't live with myself knowing that the only thing that might protect future children, my children included, my grandchildren, the children of my friends and family, is luck. It's not good enough.
You've had 6 children,
which
I would suggest is probably fairly unusual in your
in this
social age and social circles. What, why 6? Why not 2? The usual, 2 and a Labrador.
I was blessed by the fertility gods.
You were.
That I'm not saying that I didn't try to prevent having 6 children, but they've each been a blessing in their own way. But certainly my experiences has translated how I am as a parent. And I am always on the watch. I don't wrap them in cotton wool and I don't helicopter them, but I am now the mother who is at every sporting event, who never lets my children be alone with another adult. I don't see the justification for it. If the music class means being alone with a music teacher in their home, it's not going to happen.
Yep.
So I don't focus on what my children are missing out on because I fill their cup with experiences, with adventures. I'm slow to let my kids have a sleepover, but very quick to say, let's have a whole family get together.
Yeah.
And the fact is that if you don't have the time to be available for your kids, to be at the sporting rink, to be at the soccer match, then don't do it because you can't afford not to. Don't focus on what your kids are missing out on. Focus on the fact that they're potentially missing out on an experience that will scar them for the rest of their lives and change the course of their life. Yeah. And the fact is that kids who have their cup filled by attentive, engaged parents are less likely to be groomed because where there is no opportunity, the abuse can't happen.
Yep. How did it manifest itself, the effects of it? This let's call it PTSD or whatever. It doesn't. The name doesn't matter, but it has effects.
The simple thing
we are the creatures of our past.
Absolutely. Yeah. I objectified myself.
Right.
I saw myself as an object. And
the
only value I had was I left home very early. I studied exceptionally hard. I suffered from obsessive-compulsive disorder, eating disorder, was attracted to situations that, again, validated how little worth I had. I constantly tried to prove myself beyond the bounds of what was normal. I extremely self-critical my entire life.
Right. Struggled
to better understand what my motivations were in terms of being attracted to people who would hurt me further.
So there was a tendency to knock around with the bad boys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And
you think that would not? Well, it's hard to know. We can't prove a negative. You haven't got a twin that wasn't exposed.
There's no sliding doors.
There's no test case. But do you feel that you would have been a different girl
100%,
as you were a girl?
100%.
Had it not happened.
And I think in some ways I'm very grateful that I was hit by the bus when I was 20 because I was, despite being a girl who, despite being out of home very young, had managed to get into law at university, had studied really hard and had exceptionally good marks, I never felt safe in the world. avoided letting anyone get too close.
Yeah.
And I think anyone who's known me can probably speak to that. And was at the beginning of my television career, I'd started acting very, very young, and in some sense, escaping into other characters felt better than living in my own life, felt safer than living in my own skin.
Did you find that some of your fellow female actors had similar motivations to yourself? And similar
I think,
stories?
it's because there is so much stigma attached to this, and that's why me standing up and speaking about my experiences is not easy, and it's not comfortable. I'm not getting any medals for this or being paid a lump sum for getting up. I'm getting up because I am so acutely aware of how many people out there have suffered a similar fate. And I know it just from the conversations I finally have with people. There is so much shame attached to it that people don't want to speak about it. And now, because I speak about it with a degree of ease, of insouciance, that this is what happened to me, it wasn't my fault, I was never to blame. This is something that was done to me, it's not who I am. People feel safe to say, actually, this happened to me. And the statistics are off the charts, Andrew. They're off the charts. I mean, you know, as we said earlier, we love true crime. We have this crime with an astronomical amount of victims, very low prosecution, and yet we keep looking the other way and pretending that it's not there. And it's my awareness of just how many people out there have been exposed to it that makes me feel I have an obligation to get up and say something. And it's not about validating who I am or justifying who I am. It's a valediction. It's me saying, this was something that happened to me. It ends now. It's not happening anymore.
When you say we look the other way, that's an interesting thing because, you know, we're here doing this, so we're not looking the other way. But the we in that case is really families and parents who can't face it. They can't handle the truth. Here's that great line. And it's too close. You'll
often find there are high statistics on A, you cannot imagine they would be doing it, or B, sometimes the perpetrator is the breadwinner. Within the family. It could be the
dad, the stepdad, the uncle,
we'll just talk about it and we'll have therapy. But we know that for these monsters, they're not rehabilitatable. You can't rehabilitate them.
Did this experience, of course it must have affected who you are and the choices you made in life in some way. Did it mean that you married young, I'm guessing here, I've got no idea, to sort of seek a sort of a safety net or a different life or a security or something that altered the trajectory of your life?
We were never married, but I actually refused to even kiss someone until I was 20.
Right, okay.
And that kind of, I couldn't comprehend what love was supposed to look like, what care was supposed to look like, because my framework for what was normal was so out the window.
And how did that end? How did you sort of break through that?
It required me to try to learn to trust. And exactly. It's very easy to say, how do you break through that glass ceiling? Years and years of therapy and striving to better understand myself. And that is what I've done, and that is what I would encourage. But you finally reach, in my experience, you finally reach a point where the noise is too deafening.
Yeah.
That the trauma from the past, in order to understand yourself, you really need to unpack it. You need to pull it out into the light.
But that's come since you've had your own, that's come as an adult woman, since you've had all your children.
When I look at my children, I think...
Back when you were 20, what choices did you make or not make? Or
I think, as I said...
Which roads did you take?
More than anything, just constantly feeling unsafe and not letting people in. Never trusting that anyone had my best interests at heart. Doing everything I could do to punish myself. And that meant accepting behaviours from people, accepting situations and circumstances that were beneath me, and refusing to ever put myself first. And at the end of the day, we care about people, we can be compassionate and dive into philanthropy, but we live alone and we die alone. If we don't take care of ourselves and heal ourselves, how do we do it for anyone else?
The industry that you joined, and the reason that most of us know who you are, many people know your face well and know your name, It's the industry that produced, the casting couch and Harvey Weinstein and all that stuff going back into antiquity, going back to silent films, I guess. Have you any sort of insight into that world? I take it it's 20-something years ago that you started. What was it like for someone that was young and beautiful?
I would say it's
ambitious?
like it comes down to how you value yourself.
Yeah.
If you don't value yourself, then it's a very dangerous playing field. But again, I'm going to say I refuse to narrow it down to to speculate that it's a particular industry where it's most frequently playing out. It plays out in every industry. It plays out in every sector of society. That's the reality. An industry like the entertainment industry is very visible.
Yep.
And there's a platform for people to speak out about their experiences.
Yeah.
So hence it's very easy to say, oh, well, that would happen there, but it would never happen here. Yeah. And that's another mistake that we make because we tell ourselves, well, that wouldn't happen at my workplace, or that wouldn't happen in my town, and that wouldn't happen in my house. Well, guess what? It does, and it is. So I think this isn't about being a #MeToo movement because this is saying it's everyone. It's endemic. Absolutely everywhere. And we make a mistake in thinking that, as I said earlier, if we had an objective test for what does a pedophile look like, we think, well, it's the dodgy guy, it's the Harvey Weinstein, it's the monster with horns on the other side of the playground. If we were to apply that objective test to the people in our immediate family, we wouldn't like the answers because we have a habit of, even if we have a checklist in front of us about what they look like, we don't apply it to the likeable, the charming, the affable people.
The blood
they
relative.
escape, exactly, they escape our attention.
Yeah.
And that's where we make such a critical mistake.
Have you been, or as a mother, have you been very alert to that, family members and all the rest of all that stuff?
What I'm alert to is, and this is something that's taken me a long time to learn, and I know now when I speak to other parents, they're surprised, is the little red herrings, the little red flags that do pop up in terms of behaviours.
Yeah.
So have these conversations with your children, yes, about the sanctity of their own body, but more than that, if they're suffering stomach problems, if they're frequently wanting to avoid a certain person or avoid a certain member of the family.
I feel sick, I don't want to go to piano
Never ever say, come on, that's Uncle Johnny, sit on his knee, give him a cuddle. Don't do that. Your children are following their instincts.
Yep.
And the more we teach them to ignore them and dull them down, the greater the consequences are going to be in the long term. Right. So those UTIs, if we're going to go down, young children don't have UTIs unless there is something else going on.
Yeah.
If you're looking at people around you, ask yourself some logical questions. Why does that particular sport teacher insist on wanting one-on-one lessons with my child? Why do they want to take them to soccer camp without me attending? Why is that music teacher insisting that the classes be just my child and them, no one else? Why are they suddenly giving them gifts? Why do they not have adult relationships? Why is there, we console ourselves saying, oh, that person is so wonderful, their whole focus is children. And there are people like that, and that's a wonderful thing.
There's the odd one.
There is the odd one, but if their whole world is children, there's a chance that there's something else at play. Now, I'm not saying we need to look at the world and go, everyone who crosses my path or my child's path is a pedophile. But we do have to acknowledge that they might be.
Potential pedophiles.
And make decisions accordingly. And that is how this podcast, Predatory, was born. That at the end of the day, teachers, carers, parents, taking care of our children is a social responsibility. And how we do that is informed by the way we were brought up, by our socio-economic reality, by society at large, by our culture. But if you can arm yourself with education, with information, with a checklist of what some red flags might be, you are in a position to make choices where you are better able to protect your children.
Yeah, it's a lesson well learnt, and I totally and thoroughly agree with you. And
here's the one point I will make.
Yep.
That speaking to anyone, and in this podcast we speak to many people who work deeply in this area, and for myself, I've across the last 5 years spoken to specialists, I've spoken to pedophiles, I've spoken to investigators, psychologists, doctors. They will all say it's impossible to change the narrative around this without prosecutions, but you can't prosecute a crime where people won't make a disclosure.
Yeah.
And victims feel so uncomfortable about coming forward. It's never too late. I would speak from my heart to other victims, and I know a lot of people, I'm sorry, I know a lot of people prefer to identify as survivors, but I don't feel like a survivor because it's still with me every day.
Yeah.
For me, the notion of surviving is having some war wounds but carrying on in your life. This is not something I chose to engage in. This is something that happened to me, and my war wounds are still very raw and very open.
Yeah.
But doing what I'm doing with this podcast, helping others, reaching out, providing a support network for other victims is the only way that I can heal. And then maybe I can call myself a survivor. But I would encourage, if this has happened to you, reach out. There's no statute of limitations on prosecuting this. And seeing that person called to justice, looking your monster in the eyes and telling them that you have no power over me, that what you did to me might have dictated the choices I've made and the way that my life has played out, but it ends now, and you will never offend again, and you will never hurt another person. I consider myself a strong woman who has worked very hard to be successful, but it's really hard to wake up in a world that keeps looking the other way, that keeps pretending that this isn't real, that keeps talking about it from a distance, but is not prepared to look itself in the eye and question the people immediately around it and go, actually, my mate Mick, he's my good mate that I have a drink with, but maybe he did do this. And stop putting the onus of responsibility on the victim, because then they won't come forward. In no world does a child consent to sexual engagement with an adult. In no world does a child flirt with someone in the hope of sexually engaging with an adult. It does not happen. It's a furphy that detracts from the truth. And the truth is that this is happening. There are people out there who have urges that, yes, I can understand you have an urge, but it's your choice to act on it.
Yep.
And this is a question I'll throw to you, Andrew. You work so closely within the criminal justice system. The outcomes for cases of pedophilia are abhorrent. That someone can commit fraud and go to jail for 30 years. Someone can sexually abuse numerous children and get a slap on the wrist. How the hell do we curtail this? How do we stop this phenomenon? Because it is a phenomenon. The numbers are off the charts. If we don't change our criminal justice system, if we don't make it easier for victims to achieve not just justice but recompense, we know that there is a very tight super loophole that allows predators to put all of their savings into super, which can't be touched by victims in terms of compensation.
Right. Yep.
So we've got some incredible people out there. Andrew Carpenter, we've got numerous Grace Tames pushing that Super for Survivors movement to try and change that law. But when we come down to the brass tacks of what someone can expect in the courtroom, do you think the current punishment meets the crime?
That would seem to be a very good note on which to end this conversation.